live in a unique part of human history in that you can get anywhere you want to go in the world within a few taps of a button. Of course, GPS is a fairly recent invention, and we had maps before that, but even good maps are still quite a recent thing too. So how did people navigate before this? Well, they used what they had around them. They'd use landmarks, they'd use trees, buildings, rocks, whatever. But at night, it was a different story. You couldn't see any of those things. You were just wandering around in the dark with no lights. You had no idea where you were going. Probably bears trying to eat you in most of the world. So in this case, almost every society in the planet used the same thing. They used the stars. These were one thing that every society had access to, as long as it wasn't cloudy, and they could use this to navigate their way around to where they wanted to go. The most advanced society that used these, and the kind of best way, was the Polynesians. So like in Moana, where she uses the stars to kind of get where she wants to go. We'll get into a bit more detail about that in a minute. But every society would look at the stars, and they would see pictures and use those pictures to navigate. So, some common ones in the Northern Hemisphere are things like the North Star, which was connected to Ursa Minor. You've got the Plough or the Big Dipper, and then you also have things like Orion and Cassiopeia. And it might be that you're like, okay, I need to follow Orion, and it will lead me home from the bar or wherever it is you're trying to get to, between towns. And it was pretty good navigation. Polynesians had the advantage in that their society was mainly based around the equator. Constellations changed throughout the year, month on month. Different constellations appear, other ones disappear. But generally around the equator, they stayed the same. Whereas if you were in the UK trying to navigate, you'd have to know what time of year it is, which constellations to expect to see, because they would be different. So things like in the UK, Orion is a winter constellation. You tend to see it in the dark. Whereas in summer, you don't really tend to see it as much. It tends to be like just below the horizon. The disadvantage the Polynesians had is that they were operating as a society for thousands of years. During that time, stars would have died, new stars would have been born, and constellations would have changed. So they would have to keep updating their star maps as they were going, and have to memorize so many stars. So it was a very impressive skill set. Okay, so how did they actually navigate? Well, so they used the most simple tool that was most likely to have and least likely to lose, although it's not impossible. They used their hands. So most hands, human hands, are about the same size. There's obviously extremes, but there's a lot of generalizations you can make. So things like if you hold your hand out right in front of you, put your thumb up, that would cover about 2 degrees of sky. So we measure the sky in degrees because we're kind of like inside a sphere. So you start over at the horizon at 0, above you is 90, and then behind you is 180. So you could look for a constellation, hold your thumb out and be like, okay, this constellation is about 2 degrees above the horizon, so I know roughly what time it is and which direction I'm heading. You can also hold out your hand. So again, this is in Moana. They say you're measuring the stars, you're not giving the sky a high five. So again, generalizing a bit here, but most hands from the bottom of the thumb to the top of the finger are going to cover about 15 to 20 degrees of sky. You can use that to measure how high above the horizon a constellation is. Same widthways as well, so again, maybe you need to head 10 degrees west of a certain constellation. Again, you can just kind of measure it up to your knuckle or something, or 20 degrees. And yeah, very useful navigation tool. And what we have now isn't much better. You might have seen sextants, which are used for navigation. These are slightly more precise, but the Polynesians were going for thousands of years, like I said. They were able to cross the oceans, find islands regularly, find their homes regularly. So they were very skilled at using the stars to navigate. So let's say you're in the UK and you want to use some constellations to help you navigate. What are some basic ones you can kind of look for? So you've got the North Star, which is always kind of overhead, and obviously to the north. Kind of coming off the North Star, you've got the Little Dipper, this is known as Ursa Minor, but that can be a little bit of a hard constellation to find. It's quite faint, and there's a lot of stars, so it can be hard to find the North Star. It's very easy to confuse Jupiter with the North Star. It's also very bright. So an easy one to find is the Plough or the Big Dipper. Find this one, and you've got the handle and you've got the kind of frying pan looking bit. If you take the 2 stars on the edge of the frying pan and make a line up from that, it will point you straight to the North Star. Another really easy constellation to find in winter is Orion. This is most notable for its 3 stars in a line across the belt. This can be helpful because in winter I say it's very bright, it's very easy to see. It's up from like, I don't know, about 4 or 5 p.m. Pretty much as soon as it gets dark, you can probably find Orion. This is where it gets confusing because in the northern hemisphere, it's generally in the southwestern part of the sky. In the southern hemisphere, it's in the northwestern part of the sky. But generally, if you're looking towards it, you're vaguely facing west-ish, so it can be quite a good one. So the other thing as well that kind of goes hand in hand with this is the other unique thing about our modern society is that if you go back more than about 200 years, probably every person would have known every star because they needed to for all this navigation stuff. Whereas now, because of light pollution and GPS navigation and everything else, we don't need to know the names of the stars anymore. So it does make me wonder of what will the future of navigation be like? You know, will we one day just not care about the stars? You know, will this be pretty things can be admired? You know, will the constellations change? So things like most of the constellations, when you look at what they actually are, you have things like vases and animals and like, you know, great ships and stuff like that. If we had new constellations today, they would be based on things that are important to us because that's what was important to the people that made them. It's generally the Greeks or the Romans. It's what was in their lives at the time, you know, their famous heroes, their famous ships and stuff like that. Whereas if we had new constellations today, we would have constellations like the laptop and the mobile phone and the car. So I wonder if one day, maybe, you know, we will have new constellations. I guess we'll have to wait and see.